But think of the overlap of interests, which is a key for disinclined audience. Where do we meet them where their interests currently lie? That's where crossover can be quite more interesting. What is it that we do over here that overlaps in an interest? And that might mean a crossover promotion far more than it means a whole new program.
Hey, Sam, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks. Thanks so much for joining me. I see a need for more connectivity or more like a professional development or opportunities like other industries have, like the business school may have, where they're doing internship, apprenticeship there. It's this kind of connectivity with practical experience that it sounds like you all do that there.
Yeah.
And what feedback are you getting from those arts organizations regarding what
Sure.
challenges they're facing and how are you setting students up to prepare to help in that regard?
Many of the arts organizations here just frankly need help. The approach to our program is often out of a need for help, less out of a need of, hey, we've got this great structure, we want to welcome a new intern, which is a mix of we'll be teaching while they're doing work. And that's what we see a big need for. So a couple of things we did in response to that. One was create the ACE Associates. ACE Associates is the just help. I'm doing the teaching. We have people come in, but it is truly a service to the community because we saw there was service needs. The second is we have for all students doing experiential learning, we have a weekly seminar. And in that weekly seminar, we're getting feedback. I'm hearing what the experiences are like. It's letting us jump in as needed, but I find that's less common. But actually, just from a teaching perspective, add in that kind of professional development educational piece of what's that looking like? What are you learning? How do you, if you want to do some more projects in this, how do you pitch that? And people learning from each other. So that's been big because what I've been finding, at least here, is that they're being tasked with true responsibility. So I'm finding the level of expectation for the positions they're filling can be quite high. So then we're thinking, okay, if they're actually being asked to manage the social media, are our courses preparing them to do that? If it's not really under mentorship, it's actually to come in and do it. So those are the things we're still learning the most and that kind of depends on the organization and the setup, which one is really, you're essentially a job function we need done versus I have this expertise and you're doing some of it while learning from me. And I still think there's a mix in what that
Yeah,
looks like. Yeah.
that responsiveness is really crucial and I'm sure much appreciated with those organizations. You said something earlier, you've mentioned dumbing down.
Yeah.
Because I remember my response in my head when I heard this. Explain a little bit about what was posed on what are you dumbing down?
One of the things we were talking about, and I think it is like thinking what are the ingredients to dumbing down something? Dumbing down concern. Is the topic too broad? So if I'm teaching, for instance, a fundraising class, and it's just about fundraising, as opposed to it's about fundraising for the arts. It's a fundraising class. And I would say in that, I think that do we get to go to the same depth of what it is over 3 credits to talk about the case for the arts? No. In the same way that if you're doing it for the arts, you're not saying the case for an opera company versus a museum. So I don't, from a key subject matter of how do you think about the role of an organization, why it qualifies as a 501c3, how you find and locate donors and stakeholders, like the principles and acts are fairly similar. So that course, and then our audience development class, those are still guiding principles that can translate across lots of things. So we can study those in depth. The principles of fundraising, the principles of audience development, and it can be applicable to arts, culture, and entertainment. Now, there's still the opportunity, I think, to grow some hyper-specialized courses, which we are doing and looking at. But again, that just, we're in a university. We have to think of enrollment and think of things that can work for our program. So that's one. I think the second concept was I talked about the makeup of majors in a lot of our courses, that we're teaching a lot of general education courses. So Intro to Arts Orgs, our foundational class is a general education class. And I think they're embracing that for what it presents as opposed to what it dumbs down. So I guess the dumb down would be concern of, well, there's a lot of students without an arts background, students with mixed levels of interest, maybe even the subject matter is a general education course. And instead embracing, okay, here's a way to talk about this field and look at this field for people who might not otherwise even know this thing exists. And might now sit down at a concert, go to a museum, or one day even be on a board, quite frankly, and look at it differently. So I think if we see it as an opportunity, and this for me is thinking how to get more students enrolled in courses, and keep the subject matter engaging and relevant. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And then from there, majors can grow and we can offer some extra specialized things too. But so far, the second is that we're an undergraduate program where there's so much about exploration. So I think having some hyper specializing can happen. And we find that still happens in their internships. So they're getting broad ways of thinking in their curriculum. But if what you really want to do is event promotion for a big arena, I have a student who's right now the brand manager for the BOK Center. I don't think she would feel that experience as being dumbed down in any way. But in terms of how she's thinking, she's getting things from lots of different courses. So the experiential learning still lets you hyper-focus, get exactly what you want. And even then, frankly, I find students are still experimenting and trying things out. So, yeah.
Yeah. My thought was when the conversation happened, I went to, well, gosh, do we consider a med school dumbing down if we bring humanity into it? Like, or do we consider a law school dumbing down if we teach courses on humility? So, I welcome that diversity and that exploration opportunity. I think then makes a well-rounded individual to go into a field that touches on all sectors and all industries.
Well, and to give some perspective, that ACE Associates group, so it's open to our upper-level students, but also to other students by invitation, say if they've excelled in some of our other classes. And right now I have one who's chemical engineering and one who's psychology. And they're two of the best we've had, because that ability to think about peers and arts and prospects, they're doing great.
Yeah, and then they're contributing how they see things through their lens, which I think makes then the class conversation much richer.
Yeah, no, it's been terrific. And I think the most that happens, if I was giving my tip, is that I found in that Intro to Arts Orgs class, the first week or so was saying, oh, when we say the arts, what are we even talking about? So defining arts, culture, and entertainment was important, because there could be some terminology. If you're working with students who've come up through an arts background, that you just jump right into, that if they are coming from lots of different disciplines, you do often have to start with even honestly just vocabulary, basic understanding of these different organizations. But that we knock out in a week and a half, and then we have a basic understanding of what are these fields that we're talking about, and then we can run with it from there.
Well, what stands out to me with ACE is the E, entertainment.
Yeah.
And how did that land when you're talking to maybe more traditionalist arts academia?
Yeah, so far, so good. I think the arts, culture, and entertainment, essentially what happened in our specializations was, instead of, okay, you do music, theater, film, or art, we say, okay, your specialization, which means a suite of courses that fall within that field. Performing arts became a field. So it wasn't just music. Those might be interested in theater, dance, opera, orchestra, that type of thing. The second was visual arts, stayed essentially the same. We had a third that was cultural and public administration. So that was the C of arts, culture, and entertainment. And then entertainment, currently as a discipline, is as entertainment and commercial arts, which includes a lot of our students who might also have interest in film, but now is certainly growing in our growth in music industry. And I anticipate within the next year or so, we'll actually have a specialization just called music industry. But in Tulsa and at TU, it's been well embraced as far as I am aware and see. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, the size of our school, and I think that even the nature of our students. In a very large institution, it might make sense to break those into their own areas. There might be enough students to sustain a major in all three of those areas. Here, just practically speaking, there just isn't. But two, from a field perspective, I have it right here, even Ellen Rosewall's text. In the first 3 pages, she talks about arts, culture, and entertainment. So our field looks at these three in ways that they intersect, in ways that they differ. So it makes sense under an umbrella. And the third for me was, so again, not like this undergraduate nature, but if we look at the city of Tulsa, the lines between those three fields are quite blurred, both in terms of projects and programs that happen. So a museum having a performing arts series, for instance, or the institutions themselves, something like a Woody Guthrie Center that has as much performing arts, education, archival, and all under this umbrella that is it performing arts? Is it entertainment? Does that quite matter? So if anything, it's let us have, even when a student picks a specialization, a lot of flexibility to not feel super defined in their career path and trajectory. So that I think is an advantage. And then two, just in the thinking in terms of what we're seeing in the field, seeing in the city of Tulsa where they're doing their studying, where they're doing their internships, we see those lines blurring often. And the thing I've been most surprised by is just how interdisciplinary the students are, that a student might be just as excited about doing a film production as they are doing an internship at the Botanic Garden, as they are doing a strategic research project. And I think that speaks to, again, at a particularly an undergraduate level where students are just kind of learning what all this is, maybe came in with some preconceived notions or none at all, that it really lets them explore and discover throughout their time here. So I think that's been a big success.
How do you define success in your program? What are some benchmarks that you look at?
At its core, it's kind of seeing, we know if it's happening when we look at our seniors. So we kind of look at the seniors, and that's sort of a look at, we have our curriculum, the courses, and career are kind of these three areas. So from a curricular perspective, if we look at the makeup of courses, do we feel like they're relevant, they're embracing this interdisciplinary piece? So that we can just kind of look at and see. So in the courses, I mean, that really is, we have set learning outcomes and we're assessing students on those learning outcomes. Deciding if those are the right learning outcomes is a different conversation, but we're looking at those learning outcomes. So, but you have these pieces, okay, courses look good, hitting these learning outcomes. I have a new thing we've started, and it essentially takes three of the main skills we're looking for them to develop. One is a way to understand peers within arts organizations. Do they understand fundraising and prospect research and understanding audience development? And it lets them use those skills now as pro bono consulting services for local arts, culture, and entertainment organizations. And that's been a great experience for me. It's in a smaller group for me to see how our seniors really performing, and not just in written assessments, but actually every Friday for 3 hours we're meeting, working with clients and other things. Where are they at? And it lets me see, okay, how is this program fulfilling in terms of that skill set? And then even still, the final is that career piece. And as you would know, career outcomes aren't a direct reflection of how successful an education was. There's lots of things that influence what people decide for career and why. But luckily we're of a size I get to know the students. I know what choices they're making and why. And so that's for my simplest. If they are motivated within one of those three F's, that they're getting a job within at least one of those three F's. And that success out of school could very much mean I'm really at a place where I'm still trying to discover. Then we're talking about what is a good term often used in career development is like first destination. So what is a good first destination based on the goals that you have right now? Is it salary? Is it exploration? Is it doing some other things? So if they seem to have some clarity of a good first destination, not meaning they need a clarity of their next 20 years of their life, but what seems to make sense next, and they feel good about that choice, then I think we're successful.
Yes. Can we shift a little bit to audience development?
Yeah.
You've been recognized for your work in audience development. Can you talk a little bit about what strategies you've found most effective?
Yeah, well, strategies and sources. So I really love the work that the Wallace Foundation has done. I think it was in my graduate work at Syracuse University. I never would have thought that research would be a path of functions. Research was not one on my even radar path. But I think coming from an education side where it's so much like doing, and learning by doing, I didn't realize that there was so much to be gained from what people have already done and researched and studied, and then think about how that applies in your field. So that was the bug. So the Wallace Foundation sources have been big for me. In particular, Bob Harlow's text and his proposing of the three types of audiences: disinclined, inclined, and current. They're mentioned also in this text in their own version, so they're known throughout. So that foundation has always been big for me, this kind of what is it to think about disinclination, inclined, and current. So my areas have really been particularly focused on perceptual barriers and reaching that disinclined audience. I think anyone who's in the arts, that's always the ones we're just so most compelled by, the people who seem not interested. Obviously, there are other audiences to think about. And my subcategory of particular interest is that of crossover. And what might broadly be known as the crossover effect. I did a presentation in spring for the Juilliard School on this concept. And crossover, so at its most broadly, is known as where people who participate, when originally defined, the crossover effect is if you participate in one form of the art, one way of participating in the arts, you might be more likely to participate in a different way in that same art form. If I sing, I might be more likely to go to a vocal concert as well. The other was that people who participate in one art form might also be more likely to participate in another art form. Or go to museums, might be more likely to go to music. And still and ultimately even in that text, there was a thought that crossover effect isn't quite that big of a thing to use. Even in Francie Ostrower's recent study from the Wallace Foundation, they looked a little bit at crossover and found that sort of what were deemed as crossover programs didn't actually cross over. They came to that unique new offering and just kind of stayed there. Okay, that sounds cool, but they didn't say go to the new brewery, live music, songwriting thing, and then also go to the symphony concert afterwards. And they kind of just stayed in that thing. But my thought is that crossover really, if we broaden it out of just artistic participation, but think of the overlap of interests, which is a key for disinclined audience. Where do we meet them where their interests currently lie? That's where crossover can be quite more interesting. What is it that we do over here that overlaps in an interest? And that might mean a crossover promotion far more than it means a whole new program. So that overall is an area of focus of mine. A method that I had used, it's called a Q method, or the study of subjectivity. I learned at Syracuse University. It's a cool method where you have this whole process where you come up with a series of statements. And the series of statements reflect another statement. In this case, the statement was attending a live orchestral performance. And they're matters of opinion, the sort of matters of opinion related to this statement. And then you'll have a population, a person, sort these statements, in this case 32, from most characteristic of their opinion to least characteristic of their opinion. It's this whole sorting process. And you have a number of people sort that. And then this software will go and do a factor analysis and essentially help you figure out, okay, are there 2 or even 3 common sorts among these 25 people? That sort of maybe one that strongly represents 6 of them, one that strongly represents 7 of them. And what's interesting there, so I did this study with Syracuse University students, then repeated it with University of Tulsa students, was there were a few common sorts for this classical orchestral concert, whether you would attend. And in some ways it made sense. They sorted by, one sort, if they did a survey, we found there were a number of students who sorted similar if they don't really listen to classical music that often. Another was a sort that was pretty common if they do listen often. And a third sort was actually this group that sort of particularly listen, or actually quite almost like the aficionado. But what's most interesting about that method is you have these phrases that they've sorted. So you can see, among all 3 of them, they all ranked high this phrase. Like, I'd go if it's one of the world's best, just this phrase. I'd go if it's one of the world's best. They ranked that high. And somebody else, for these, 2, they say a phrase of a way to experience pure emotion, ranked high here, but then ranked really low here. So from a promotion standpoint, now again, this is just for these 2 student populations. That might mean, okay, here's a phrase that resonates well across all of these groups. Here's a phrase that resonates well here, but it's going to alienate this phrase here, or this opinion. The methodology is often used, say, in political campaigns, to figure out slogans, to figure out things that rally people together. But again, I worked under the mentorship of some faculty at Syracuse University. But that I find is an interesting thing for audience development. And I think not just the role of programming, but the role of promotion and media and language and imagery that might connect. So that's been a growing area of interest of mine when I can make the time for it, that I enjoy too. Yeah.
How much are you able to use that in your teaching? So when you say you make the time for it, is it something, because I hear all the time from organizations that they can't figure out this puzzle of aging audience and not capturing Gen Z and millennials. Do you focus at all or much on that and strategies that can market and promote and communicate to that younger subset?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you're actually hitting on one like broadly tactic we have in this program. So I'm not a tenured track faculty. I'm an applied faculty. So all my role is focused on teaching or service to the field or service to the community. And I have multiple hats that I wear. We have some music industry professionals and residents. They have multiple hats. So how we've connected our profession into our teaching, or the work that we went to in our teaching, is the name of the game in ACE management. Corey Taylor, who's our music industry professional in residence, also handles all the booking for entertainment for our game days here. So he has a class called Game Day, where what he's doing in his work is also a thing he's teaching. So we're thinking about that all the time. So in a couple ways. One, what's now currently called marketing and programming, we're, I think, going to just reframe as audience development, because it is so important. It's what marketing programming honestly focuses on anyway. So that class holistically does. The students each learn how to do in-depth interviews. They pick their own product that's interesting to them, identify what the barriers are for that person, and in a one-on-one way, think through that process. It's undergraduate level. It doesn't get to organizational thinking, but at least to like think through what is it to hear somebody's opinions of something, and then think through how you would alter promotions or programming to relate to that. So we did in that class, and then the ACE Associates class for sure. That's one of their areas we call is next gen audience development, and it's particularly with the population they have access to, TU students. So people come to us, how do we get more TU students to show up to things? Well, the ACE Associates is a great starting point. And so they might do focus groups, small surveys, things within, an undergraduate level, but still, I think, cool they get to do as undergrads. So both as service and area of study, absolutely, we're doing that. I haven't done yet having them work with me on my own project. I mean, they were the subject of some projects I've done, but certainly that skill set is in there, and helping them think not in general observation, and to think in those data ways of like, oh, audience is dying. Well, what is the actual percentage? What does that look like? That bug was also placed in my mind when I went to the League of American Orchestras, Essentials of Orchestral Management training, and we had a reading, and it was all about aging audiences, and it was really compelling, and I felt so good. And I can't remember the decade, but it was in like the mid 20th century that it was written. And I remember feeling like, oh, okay, interesting. Like somehow, I mean, shouldn't they be dead now? Or
Well,
something? It really was a profound, like, okay, what does this mean in big picture? That's still a constant discussion point. Yeah.
Right. So I was going to ask, so it's like the audiences have been aging for decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
So somehow we're getting that same age range. That's the core of perhaps traditional orchestra, that kind of performing arts. At some point, at some point, those that are dying off, they're being repopulated.
Right.
I know that's a smaller amount, but it's still there.
Yeah, and I think, and I've not done a full literature review on this, but I think what strikes me, and what kind of struck me after that conference, this was back in 2011 or 2012, I think. At the end of the day, in terms of how we're funded in arts organizations, we're not funded by ticket sales primarily. We're funded by, it's important that we're here, people donate, and that can be through a trajectory of concert goers who become donors, but it's our survival in all reality financially hasn't been based on ticket sales. And so I think that's part of why it can be this thing we're focused on, but really it's like, as long as we can fundraise to supplement, and that's what we're here. I think that's one of the kind of root underlying, I don't want to say issues. I don't think it's a bad thing that it's not a bigger source of revenue, but it can be a reason that something might perpetuate, because essentially, as long as the marketing goals are hit, that like the dollars that need to happen are happening, which are also not as high typically as the fundraising goals are going to be, particularly the smaller the organization. I think that's another thing that sort of allows it to be. And then in addition to, there's something that's happening where there's still audiences are being replenished in some way. But if it comes down to just dollars, somehow ticket revenue, like sales revenues, are being either adjusted or whatever happens, that the budget is still balancing in some capacity. Yeah.
Yes. Well, this is the time of the podcast that I like to ask every guest the same two questions. So here we go. Sam, how do you define the arts?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think of it in terms of when we have our class, we do this art versus entertainment. And for me, if I say the arts or something is art, where its creation precedes sales or exposure. Doesn't mean impact. I could create something because I wanted to have an impact. And its intention might be impact, but the intention behind the arts, behind something being, if I would say, is it art or entertainment, say the performance, that its motivation for creation preceded sales or exposure. That's sort of a simplest definition for me. And then the arts, in my mind, when I say the arts, still funnel within broadly what probably people call the fine arts. So for me, the arts tend to be, in terms of subfields and specific fields, the fine arts. So there's the creation of it, and then, okay, which one of these do we put in under arts, which one under culture, which one under entertainment? For me, arts tend to be the fine arts. Yeah.
I've had conversations with millennials and Gen Z to ask that question because I'm curious what they think. And I've had from creation, but it could be creation to cooking or creation to like playing a sport, that's a form of art. And so it seems like anything that's a live or a performative nature that could be that creating.
Yeah, well, I think you're hitting on where I see overlap in terms of here at TU and programming. That word creativity, I find, is quite an overlapping term now in engineering and business and entrepreneurship and art. So creativity is also an interesting term, I think, to see how it lands and lives in different places and programs.
I'm a broken record when I say you can't be innovative if you're not creative. And so anytime we want to talk about being the most innovative culture or the workforce, we've got to be the most creative if we're going to be that.
Yeah.
Okay. So light note, what color do you love the most and why?
Oh, I would say probably like a burgundy. It makes me think of fall. Fall's my favorite season. So fall colors are just always my vibe. So that, or maybe like a burnt orange, might do it too. Yeah.
Do you have fall in Tulsa? Because in Ohio, we seem to now have summer and winter.
Oh yeah, we get a stint of a fall here. I mean, it's I was in upstate New York before, so I do miss my upstate New York falls. Western New York, I should really say, falls. But no, we do. We get a fall here, and Tulsa also has a great Oktoberfest to throw in too. But no, we do get some fall colors. It's sometimes short-lived, but we definitely get some fall colors here. Yeah.
I like burgundy. That was very specific. Yes, very nice.
Yeah.
Sam, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to continuing the conversations with you.
Great. Thank you.